Okay, so now that we are live, well, sort of, welcome everybody to the Spiritual Mentoring Group. Today is September 3rd, 2017, and we are in the middle of the month of Elul. We only have a couple of more weeks left, a week, 2.5 weeks until Rosh Hashana. And so we're going to continue today traveling through, if you will, talking about Rosh Hashana. Please feel free to ask questions. It's very much more loosely structured than the way that I normally structure the class. And that's because I want it to be more of a conversation. If you can do me a favor though, and before you unmute yourself, make sure that there's not a lot of noise going on in your background so that we can actually hear you. That would be really good. Okay, so today we're going to talk about Rosh Hashana. And some of the things that we're going to talk about, we kind of already touched on a little bit, both in the Navigating Judaism class and last week. But you'll please forgive me for being a little redundant. You can never hear some of this stuff too much. And yeah, let's get started, because I really want everybody to be prepared when Rosh Hashana comes, that you feel like you really know what's going on, okay? So first of all, we start the holiday just like all holidays and Shabbat. We light candles, okay? And the blessing is basically the same as the blessing for Shabbat, except for the last word, or last two words, if you will. So the blessing for Shabbat is usually Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kiddushanu B'Mitzvotav V'Tzivanu Lahadlik Ner Shel Shabbat. Or some people say Lahadlik Ner Shel Shabbat Kodesh, which means the Holy Sabbath, okay? But for the holidays, normally we end the blessing, instead of Lahadlik Ner Shel Shabbat, we say Lahadlik Ner Shel Yom Tov. Now you can just say Yom Tov, or you can give the other name of the holiday. Not usually, we don't usually say like Lahadlik Ner Shel Rosh Hashana, but rather we use the name that God used in the Torah, which is Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Remembrance. That's what, I mean, Rosh Hashana has a lot of names. It's Rosh Hashana, which is the head of the year. It's also Yom HaZikaron. It's also Yom Teruah. But the specific prayer for Rosh Hashana is Lahadlik Ner Shel Yom HaZikaron. If you don't remember Yom HaZikaron, just saying Yom Tov is fine. And it means, blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to light the candles of the day of remembrance. Okay? Now, after we light the candles, normally when we light candles on Shabbat, we say that blessing. And then there's another prayer that we say called a Yehi Ratzon, and we're asking God to bless our children and our family and things like that. We also say that on the holiday. Actually, we don't. Now I have to look that up. I don't think we also say it on the holidays. But if we do also say it on the holidays, I think it's fine to say it anytime. But before we do that, and after we light the candles, so in between the two, we're going to make a second blessing. And this is the blessing that's usually referred to as Shehechianu. And the blessing is Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Shehechianu V'Kiyamanu V'Higianu Lazman Hazeh. And we say that when we light the candles for any holiday, including the Hanukkah candles. Okay, now we don't light candles on on Purim. And the candles that we light on Hanukkah aren't like festival candles, because there's no prohibition against using fire on Hanukkah. But because we light candles, because that's the mode of starting the holiday, we also say the Shehechianu. What does it mean in English? What it means in English is, blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has granted us life, sustained us, and enabled us to reach this occasion. So we're thanking God for bringing us to this day of the holiday. All right. So we say Shehechianu after we light the candles, on both days of Rosh Hashana. Now, if you remember from last week, I told you that this year, Rosh Hashana runs straight into Shabbat. So we have basically like a 3-day holiday. We have Wednesday night, Thursday, which is day 1 of Rosh Hashana. Thursday night, Friday, which is day 2 of Rosh Hashana, which is my birthday, my Hebrew birthday. And then Friday, we go from the second day of Rosh Hashanah directly into Shabbat. Now, on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, we also make the Shehechianu blessing after lighting the candles, except there's a little bit of a question. And I will get into that in a minute. I have another slide, but it's not the next slide, so I'll tell you about that in a second. So, after we light the candles, those who don't have young children or those who have very young children that they can take with them, and certainly the men, go off to shul, all right? The davening on Friday night of Rosh Hashanah is not, it's not really any longer than, the davening of the evening of Rosh Hashanah is not any longer than Friday night davening, because on Shabbat, on Friday night, we daven mincha, which marks the end of the weekday. Then we daven a section called Kabbalat Shabbat, right, where we receive the Shabbat. That's when we sing Lecha Dodi and a bunch of other special songs. And then we do Mariv, which is the evening prayer, the nighttime prayers. But on the holiday, we don't do that middle piece. We don't do Kabbalat Shabbat. Although on Rosh Hashanah, there are a few things that are added to Mariv, just a couple of lines here and there, really, where we're asking Hashem to inscribe us for a good year, to put us in the book of life, to judge us favorably and with mercy. And there are also a few of these types of phrases that are added to the silent prayer, the Amidah, or Shmona Esrei, which we're going to look at a little bit today. But otherwise, we don't have that Kabbalat Shabbat, so the service might even actually take a little bit less time than the normal Friday night service does. Then everybody comes home, and just like on Friday night, we have Kiddush. Now, the Kiddush for Rosh Hashanah is a little bit different than the Kiddush for Shabbat, because we're not recalling the Shabbat. So the Kiddush is much shorter, but we still have a Kiddush over wine, and then we have challah. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but it's traditional from Rosh Hashanah through Sukkot, because even though you have Rosh Hashanah, and then you have 10 days, and then you have Yom Kippur, and then you have 5 days, and then you have Sukkot, which lasts 8 days, lasts 7 days, and then the last day is Shmini Atzeret. Even though there's those gaps in there, in a way it's considered like one long holiday, in that it's like the season of the new year. And according to Jewish understanding, even though Rosh Hashanah is the judgment day, and that's the day that we are written in the book for what's going to be during the year, we still have the opportunity on Yom Kippur to change that decree, which is why we make an atonement. First, we get the judgment, and some of us are put in the book of life, and some of us are put in the book of death, and it's decided for the year if we're going to have an abundance of money, or if we're going to struggle or have health issues or whatever. All of these things are decided on Rosh Hashanah, but they're not. It's like they're written in pencil on Rosh Hashanah, and then they are written over in ink on Yom Kippur, but the books are still open until the end of Sukkot. And at the end of Sukkot, the book is closed for the year, and what's written is what's going to happen. So there's a lot of things that we do during this season that are symbolic of a prosperous and sweet year, all right? And one of the things that we do is we eat round challahs. Now, why do we make the challah round? There's a lot of theories about that. First of all, it kind of symbols the cycle of the year. And since this is the beginning of the new year, it's not the beginning of the spiritual new year, it's the beginning of the physical new year. So just like you know how in the secular world, the fall, the end of summer, the beginning of autumn, when school starts again and everything, is kind of, it's the new school year. It's not the new year. The year starts in January, but it's the new school year. And so there's still this feeling of newness. There's a feeling of a beginning, a new beginning in the fall. Now, if you live in the Southern Hemisphere, it's not the fall, it's the spring for you. And I'm not sure, like for people, maybe Virginia can give us an idea. Does your school year start in the fall, which would be our spring, like April, or does your school year also start in November, September, like ours? It's just that it's spring instead of fall.
Yes, school starts next week. On Tuesday, I think, for the new intake of kids.
That's in England, but what about in the Southern Hemisphere, in South Africa?
In South Africa, school starts in January for the year.
Oh, really? Very interesting. Okay, so it's totally different.
And then I think, the matriculants and they start writing exams in October. And so school by about November, they're finished.
And then they have, so their vacation in South
Africa, they have 4 terms. They have the Easter one, which is 10 days. Then they have the July one, which is, oh goodness, how long? 3 or 4 weeks. And then, of course, they have one in October. For some reason, it's called the Michaelmas. I don't know why. In October. And then December, it's about 6 weeks of, because, like it finishes in early December, and then they go back in January.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And we are going to be at South Africa from the 29th of October, well, the very last Sunday in October. South Africa is 2 hours behind us.
Right.
Because, our clocks go back.
Right.
But theirs don't. So at the moment, they're an hour in front of us, ahead of us.
You mean you in England?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's 7:30 here, it's 8:30 there. But after the last Sunday of October, they will be 2 hours ahead.
And in October, they will be, Israel and South Africa will be in the same time zone.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas right now, we're also an hour off, but the other direction. They're an hour behind us right now. And
an hour or 2?
1.
Oh, 1. Oh, I wasn't.
They're 1 hour behind us right now. And when we change back, then we'll be in the same time zone. Because if you look on the map, Israel and South Africa, Israel is just due north of South Africa. It's one line. We're in the same
time zone.
Yeah, same time zone.
Meridian or whatever.
Yeah, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not 100% sure what you call global whatever. Anyway, okay, let me go ahead and if you can mute yourself again, that would be great. And so because we're starting the new year as far as the anniversary of the creation of the world and the anniversary of the creation of mankind, so it is, in a way, it's the beginning of the year, the secular year, if you will. That if you can kind of wrap your brain around the idea that within Judaism there is a secular and religious year, which is totally separate from the rest of the world. So a representation of this cycle is this round challah. But more than that, if you look at the picture that I've got posted right now, so we try to do it in a way that it looks like a crown. Okay, that's what it's supposed to be representing. It's a crown. And that's really the theme of Rosh Hashanah. The theme of Rosh Hashanah is the idea that God as king is rendering judgment on us. And it is our place, if you will, to acknowledge his kingship over us and his, position of being on the throne, and basically saying, you are the powerful king, and I am submitting to your kingship. Okay, so the round challah has these two kind of symbolisms, and we start serving the challah, the round challahs on Rosh Hashanah, and usually we make them a little extra sweet. We sprinkle sugar and cinnamon on them or put raisins in them. And there's some people that don't like sweet challah, and that's okay. They don't have to. But most people do that. We add a little extra honey to it, make it just a little sweeter. And because like the idea is this sweetness theme, if you will. It's a really bad holiday for diabetics, let me tell you. But anyway, so we start serving it at Rosh Hashanah, and we serve it for every holiday and Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and the end of Sukkot. All right, so I'm for almost a full month. I think it's almost a full month. I will be serving round challahs. Okay, why do we dip? So, normally when you make kiddush over the wine and then you make hamotzi, so you make the blessing on the bread, normally we dip the bread in salt. Why do we dip the bread in salt? Because that's what was done in the temple, and the challah is reminding us of the temple service, and it's basically turning our Shabbat table into an altar, if you will. Basically, we turn our home into a mini temple, and the table is considered an altar of sorts. It's not really, but it's symbolically. And so when we make hamotzi on the bread, we dip the bread in salt. However, during this period of time, instead of dipping the bread in salt, we pour honey on it. Okay, so that's the tradition from the beginning, from the first day of Rosh Hashanah through Shmini Atzeret, which is the last day of Sukkot. All right, so that's the first symbol, the round challah and dipped in honey. Now, you may or may not have ever heard of this. Everybody's heard of the Passover Seder, right? But how many of you have ever heard of the Rosh Hashanah Seder? We also have a Rosh Hashanah Seder. It's not like the Passover Seder where we're reading from a book and it takes 4 hours. But when we sit down to the table after we make hamotzi, there are a variety of symbolic foods with their associated blessings that are served before the actual meal is served. It's kind of like an appetizer, if you will. The interesting thing is that whereas the foods that are served at the Passover Seder have a like a requirement, you have to have those things. The foods served at the Rosh Hashanah Seder, because they're much more symbolic, have a lot more flexibility. All right, and I'll explain to you in a minute what that means. But the first thing we do is we eat an apple dipped in honey. And we eat our apples dipped in honey as a representation of the idea of a sweet new year, because apples and honey are sweet. And so we say a little bracha that is, the translation of it is, may it be your will, Hashem our God and the God of our forefathers, that you renew us for a good and sweet year. Everybody is familiar with the apple and honey. Anyway, there's a famous song, and it's dip the apple in the honey. And there was one video where this little kid is saying, I'm going to dip the apple in the honey, mommy. And he puts the apple phone in the honey. And anyway, it was funny. So it's not funny anymore. But okay, back to our PowerPoint slide. Show. Okay. Sorry that wasn't as funny as it was supposed to be, but anyway, we dipped the apple in the honey, not the apple phone, apple the fruit, okay, in the hopes of a sweet new year. One of the other traditional foods to have at this Seder, if you will, is dates. So we pass out the dates and we say, this blessing may be your will, Hashem, our God, and God of our forefathers, that our enemies be consumed. Why do we say that? Because the word for consume has the same root as the word tamar, which is a date, sheyi tamo. So it's a play on words. Judaism is really famous for having these play on words, and we play with words all the time in Hebrew. Another food that we traditionally eat is leeks. And we eat leeks because the Hebrew word for leeks is karisa. And it sounds a little bit like, it's not from the same root, but it sounds a little bit like karet, which means to be destroyed. So you're getting the idea that we eat all of these different foods because their names remind us of a significant concept that we want to ask God for in our lives for the coming year, okay? And the ones that are traditional, almost all of them have to do with our enemies being destroyed. That's really the majority of them. We have black-eyed peas, we have gourds, which is any kind of squash. We have pomegranates. Why pomegranates? Because they have a whole bunch of seeds. Somewhere along the line, somebody said that there were 613 seeds in a pomegranate. Not necessarily true, because every pomegranate has a different amount, but anyway, the idea is that since there are 613 mitzvot, we want to show our desire that our lives will be as full of mitzvot as a pomegranate is of seeds. We also have fish as one of the symbolic dishes, because fish are a symbol of abundance and fertility, because of course, you know, fish lay millions of eggs at a time. And so we ask Hashem to bless us with that we would be fruitful and multiply both in children and money. And then you may have heard, I don't know if you have, that there is a tradition to have a fish head on the table. There is also an alternative tradition to have a ram's head on the table. I actually saw something recently that said that I could order, oh, it was from my meat delivery. I don't eat a lot of meat, but the meat that I order is ethically grown and killed, because we believe very, very strongly in animals being treated properly, even if they're going to be used for food. And the company that I order my meat from had the availability of being able to order these ram's heads or goat's heads of some sort if you wanted to. I'm like, no, thank you. I will not have an actual fish head on my Seder table. Unfortunately, I don't know what we're going to do this year. In years past, I would buy gummy fish. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there's a candy that's made out of a hard gel, and they come like gummy bears and gummy worms. And in America, they also have gummy fish. And so I would buy a bag of gummy fish, and for the fish heads, I would just cut the heads off of the gummy fish, and I would serve a bowl full of gummy fish heads. And 2 years ago, I was in England, and I bought gummy fish. So I know they have in the kosher grocery stores in England, kosher gummy fish, and I brought those home, but now I'm out of gummy fish. So unless I find somebody to get me some gummy fish darn quick, it looks like I'm not going to have gummy fish for Rosh Hashana. But anyway, it's traditional to have a fish head or a ram's head. Why? Because the term Rosh Hashana refers to it literally means the head of the year. And so again, this like play on words, we're asking Hashem that on this day, we're asking Hashem that we as a people would be like a fish and not like the head and not like the tail. right? The head is what makes the decisions, and the tail just has to follow along. Or another way of looking at it is that we would use our heads instead of meekly following whatever the crowd says to do. So, so a lot of people have these fish heads or goat head on their table, which I can't even imagine doing. But anyway, and then one of the other vegetables that we have on the, or symbolic foods, is a beet. And the reason that we do that is the Hebrew word for beet is siluk. I don't know why that says silka. It's not silka, it's siluk, which is similar to the word to remove. And we're asking Hashem to remove our enemies. Okay, now you can make up your own. If you're really good at making puns, like one of the examples that was given many, many years ago when I was learning about this concept was to take a piece of celery and to put half raisins in it and to say, may we have a raise in salary. You see, so that's like an English version of the same types of plays on words that are being done here. So if you can think of other ones that, you know, you could put lettuce and peas together and say, let us have peace, or, you know, different things like that. It doesn't have to be in Hebrew, and it doesn't have to be these. It can be anything that you can have fun with and make meaning for. And the whole thing doesn't take more than 10 or 15 minutes. There are some people who take all of this stuff and put it together and make a salad out of it. And they serve this salad. They call it a simanim salad. Simanim, the word siman means a symbol. Simanim would be plural of symbols. And so they'll just put them all together and have this simanim salad. Okay. Now, on the second night of Rosh Hashanah, it is also traditional to eat a new fruit. That is, a fruit which is seasonal, that is for this season, but that we haven't tasted yet since the season began, because when we light the candles on the second day and we make the Shechianu prayer, there's a question whether the second day of Rosh Hashanah is its own entity altogether, like a second holiday, or if it's really part of the first one. So since there's a question and we don't want to make a blessing in vain, what we do is we put out this new fruit, whatever it's going to be, and we have in mind when we light the candles and we say Shechianu, that we're also saying the Shechianu for the new fruit that we're going to eat at the table. Okay? Because whenever you get new clothing or something that gives you tremendous pleasure, or you eat a fruit that you have not yet eaten this season, then you say the Shechianu prayer. Now, I am kind of limited because I have a lot of fruit allergies. So I usually will try to hold off eating one particular normal fruit so that I can have a new fruit at the table at Rosh Hashanah. And because I don't eat a lot of really sweet fruits, I haven't had any grapes or any pineapple this season. So when I go shopping the week of Rosh Hashanah, I'll see, do they have grapes or pineapple, and I'll have that as my new fruit. The rest of the family, I usually try to get them something exotic, something that they're not likely to have. Like, for example, in that picture, I don't even know what those are. Honestly, I have no clue what those fruits are. But if I do get them, I have to handle them with gloves on, because I can't touch these fruits because I don't know if I'm allergic to them or not. So it's so funny. People sometimes stare at me because I'll go and grab a plastic bag, you know, for putting the fruit in, and I'll put my hand in it, and then I'll pick up the fruit and turn it inside out. So I never actually had to touch the fruit. I'm allergic to mango, and I'm allergic to kiwi, and I'm allergic to passion fruit. So I'm not allowed to eat any exotic fruits that I don't already know I'm allowed to eat. Okay, so this is kind of like backtracking. It's not exactly in order, but I wanted to share those things first because they were kind of more important to touch on. But in shul, okay, so after candle lighting, if you get to go to shul, the mincha prayer is the same as the Mincha prayer every Erev Shabbat, okay? But between Mincha and Maariv, there's a special prayer which is said that is called Achot Ketana. Achot Ketana, Achot Ketana means little sister. And it comes from a passage in Song of Songs, chapter 8, verse 8, which refers to this little sister. And of course, Song of Songs is very difficult to read and understand on its own anyway, because it's so poetical and so metaphorical. But the commentators have said that this passage that talks about a little sister is referring to Israel. And so I wanted to share with you the words to this prayer, and that it would be meaningful for you, and maybe you'll read it if you're not in shul, and if you are in shul, you can read it in shul. Hang on one second, I'm going to actually play it for you.
אחות קטנה תפילותיה, רוחה ועונה תהילותיה, עלה לפמלא מחלותיה, יכלה שנה בקללותיה, יכלה שנה בקללותיה. בנוע מילים לך תקרא, שיר והילולים לחנה, עוד מעט הייתה לי מנחבר, שמים אותך נחלותיה, תכלה שנה בקללותיה. מתי תעלב איתך מפה, מבית כלא אולי תשמור, ותחליף אלף בצאתך כגיבור, להטט לך מחלותיה, תכלה שנה בקללותיה. חילה קבעו הגוי כולו, בטובה סבו, בזזו איש לו, ואת ליבה קבעו, ובכל זאת ממך מעלותיה, יכלה שנה בקללותיה. אחרי שנה, אחרי שנה,
If you guys like that, I can try to remember to post the link on the Facebook group. But let's take a look at the translation here. It's and you can, by the way, you could put that word achot ketana into YouTube and you can find the song. But it says, the little sister, her prayers she prepares and proclaims her praises. Oh God, please heal her now, her ailments. And then each verse ends with this phrase, let the year and its curses conclude. In other words, whatever bad things that happened this year, where at the end of the year, let them be finished. That everything that we've gone through this year that's been hard, it should be done, okay? And then it goes on. With pleasant words she calls upon you, and with song and raises, I think praises it's supposed to say, for such befits you. Why do you avert your eyes? Look, enemies devour her heritage. Let the year and its curses conclude. So basically each verse is kind of talking about Israel and the things that she suffers or suffered. And then he says, let the year and its curses conclude. Let it be over. Tend to your sheep that the lions dispersed, and pour your wrath upon those who say destroy. Your right hand's foundation vine they have breached and plucked its fruit, not even leaving her tiny grapes. Let the year and its curses conclude. Stand her up from degradation to lofty majesty, for in the pit of exile her soul has been melted. When the basest are elevated, her heart is outpoured. Among the poorest of the poor are her dwellings. Let the year and its curses conclude. When will you raise up your daughter from the pit and from the dungeon? Will you break her yoke? May you act wondrously when you go forth like a hero to bring an end and conclusion to her ailments. Let the year and its curses conclude. Be strong and rejoice, for the plunder is ended. Place hope in the rock and keep his covenant. You will ascend to Zion, and he will say, pave her paths. Let the year and its blessings begin. So he's going throughout saying, may the year and its curses conclude, and then he ends it with, let the year and its blessings begin. So this is a beautiful transition between Mincha, which is from last year, if you will, and Mariv, which marks the beginning of the new year. And it's just a beautiful song. It's a beautiful prayer. And so I wanted to share that with you. Something interesting, just a note, the rabbi who wrote it his name is Rabbi Avraham Chazan, and he was a disciple of the Ramban who died in the year 1270. So he was late 13th century Jewish scholar and poet, and he was Sephardi, but this is such a significant prayer that it's included in both the Sephardi and the Ashkenazi siddurs. Okay. Now, just something that I wanted to share a little bit, just so that everybody kind of is on the same page and understands what's going on. And again, this all may be very review for you, but I don't think the review is a bad thing. So the way that the prayer services are set up is we have the morning prayer service, which is called Shacharit. We have the afternoon prayer service, which is called Mincha. And each of these, by the way, are taking the place of particular sacrifices that were done throughout the day when the temple was standing. You had the Shacharit, you had the Mincha, and then you had the Aravit, which in English, we call it Ma'ariv. But I think Aravit is the correct way to refer, to the evening prayers in Hebrew. Okay, so we normally, every day, we have Shacharit, Mincha, and Mariv. Right? Shacharit is said in the morning. It can be said anytime from sunrise to late, mid-morning. And then Mincha is from late morning all the way till sundown. And then Aravit or Mariv can be said anytime after sundown. Okay? So those are the normal three prayers. We say them every day. And then on Shabbat and holidays, we add a fourth service after Shacharit called Musaf. So on Shabbat, Friday night, we do Mincha and Mariv. Shabbat morning, we do Shacharit and Musaf. And then in the evening, we do Mincha. And then right after Shabbat ends, we do Mariv. Okay? On Yom Kippur, this is the only day of the year, we have a 5th prayer service. So on Yom Kippur, you have Mincha, which isn't part of Yom Kippur. You have Mariv, which is the first prayer service in the evening that starts Yom Kippur, right? Then in the morning, you have Shacharit, you have Musaf, then you have Mincha, and then you have Ne'ilah, and after Ne'ilah, then Yom Kippur is over and you go on to Mariv. So normally during the weekdays, we have 3 prayer services. On Shabbat, we have 4. And on Yom Kippur, the only day of the year, we have 5 prayer services. Okay? All right. Now, there is a prayer called the Shmona Esrei. It's also called the Amidah. It is considered the essence of formal prayer. It is considered that if you cannot do anything else during the day, you should do a Shmona Esrei. Okay? Shmona Esrei is called Shmona Esrei because Shmona Esrei in Hebrew means 18. Originally, the prayer was constructed with 18 blessings. At one point, a 19th blessing was added to it. This was during the time of early Christianity when there was a lot of heretics. And so it is we call it a blessing, but basically it's asking God to out the heretics. And so if you look on the screen, the Shmona Esrei, or the Amidah, it's called the Amidah because Amidah means standing. It's the standing prayer. It's the silent prayer. It's the prayer of 18, except that it's 19. The weekday Shmona Esrei, well, all of the Shmona Esreis are divided into 3 sections, okay? The first section and the last section are the same for the weekdays, for holidays, and for Shabbat. That's the same. But the middle section during the week has 13 blessings, and on Shabbat and on a holiday, it has 1 long blessing, okay? So basically, the Shmona Esrei during the week is made up of 19 blessings, and we'll eventually get there as we walk through the Siddur in our group, but it's going to take a little while for us to get there. But then, so you can see it's divided into these different sections, and you have the 13 middle prayers, making 19 on the weekday and making 7 on Shabbat and holidays, right? Because you still have the 3 at the beginning and the 3 at the end, and then you have 1 long one in the middle. It's not as long as the 13 middle ones on the weekday, but on Shabbat we have so many other things that we do that the service is still a bit longer. Okay, so if you see, this is the way that the Shmona Esrei is divided. Now, I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask any questions about Rosh Hashana, excuse me, or the Rosh Hashana davening that you may have.
Sure.
But anyway, so next week we'll talk a little bit about the differences in the prayers for Rosh Hashanah versus for Shabbat. What are we adding? What are we asking for? How are we addressing God and stuff like that? Okay. If there's any things that you see online that raise a question for you, feel free to write it down and ask me or email it to me, and I can address it during class next week. And yeah, so let me go ahead and say good night, and thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you next week. I hope everybody has a really awesome week, and that you spend this week preparing yourself for Rosh Hashanah and the coming new year. Oh, one other thing. Anyway, all right, have an amazing week, and I look forward